2018 seems to be the year of the smartphone camera, and Huawei is bringing their A-game to the table. But it's not the only one. Samsung has also reimagined the camera, so this right here could be one of the most intense head-to-heads we've ever seen. We'll loop back to the cameras and the pricing because there's a lot to say about that, and that's where it gets really interesting. But first, we need to see how the P20 Pro stacks up against the Galaxy S9 Plus in other aspects. Both phones are glass beauties, and with these similar materials comes a similar feel in the hand. Having said that, you'll notice two things instantly. The P20 Pro is slimmer and lighter, substantially so, and its curvature is slightly more organic. The sides of the Samsung jut out just that little bit, which I'd say makes the Huawei the more comfortable phone to hold. But from an aesthetic standpoint, these are just two very different visual directions entirely. Samsung has definitely played it safer, sticking to the colours and the screen format that they know works, with the exception of the new lilac option, which I really dig. But on the other hand, the P20 Pro looks nothing like previous generations of phones in this lineup. It almost looks like Huawei has started with an iPhone X design, notch, camera placement and all, and adjusted it. But you've got to give them credit for the colours here, because this Twilight gradient version is something you've never seen before on a phone. Samsung does also get a couple of points here though. It retains the headphone jack, which is lost with the P20 Pro, and whilst it's good to see that Huawei has finally got round to including IP67 water resistance, this is trumped by Samsung's IP68. But I wouldn't get too caught up with this, the difference between these two is honestly not worth worrying about. Both phones have fingerprint scanners here, but their position and therefore functionality couldn't be more different, whereas the S9 Plus has one towards the middle of the phone on the back, which is much better and easier to feel for than with the S8. The P20 Pro has one on the front of the phone, which I would say makes it a little bit more awkward to use when you're just trying to unlock the phone, but gives you the benefit of being able to use it as a home button, or in fact being able to replace the entire navigation bar, giving you more screen real estate. Samsung takes the win in the screen department. Don't get me wrong, Huawei has improved, and the notch at the top does mean the top bezel is pretty slim, but the S9 Plus has a far higher resolution, brighter, larger and punchier display. And as the screen is the main interaction you're going to have with your phone, this is a big deal. The P20 Pro's display isn't bad, but it's very average against a competitor which has basically the best screen on the market. Huawei has for the first time got an 18.7:9 aspect ratio with this phone, which makes it relatively slightly taller than the 18.5:9 on the S9 Plus. But why they've done this is tough to say, it's almost impossible to tell the difference. The Huawei P20 Pro comes with 128 gigs of storage by default, but no SD card, whereas the S9 Plus comes with 64, 128 and 256 gig options, all with SD card compatibility. Both phones come with a generous 6 gigs of RAM, but the S9 is also more powerful, but only for non-AI tasks. You see, with the Kirin 970 chip in the P20, Huawei is pushing the Neural Processing Unit, which is a dedicated chip capable of handling AI tasks. And for these tasks, Huawei is somewhat better prepared. But this is only really going to aid processors that have been designed to take advantage of it. So right now that's a very select few, such as the pre-installed first-party apps and the UI. In terms of third-party apps, games, benchmarks and the like, the Galaxy S9 Plus takes the lead. But because the Emui software on the P20 has been built from the ground up to use this AI capability, it is every bit as responsive as Samsung's offering. And on the subject of Emui, these two phones have a very different software experience. Huawei has Emotion UI or Emui 8.1, based on Android 8.1. But Samsung has Samsung Experience, which is formerly known as TouchWiz, version 9.0, but that's actually based off Android 8.0 right now. So Huawei in this case is a little more up to date. And while both softwares are pretty packed with features, Huawei takes it in terms of sheer customizability. Now, the entire EMUI is also laced with artificial intelligence integration and neat little tricks the phone can do because of it. But the core experience is still the same as with past Huawei devices, which is to say solid, reliable and fast. But personally, I prefer the format of Samsung's launcher, which separates the app drawer from the home screen. Given that the P20 Pro is such a slim device, it's surprising that it has a 4000 mAh battery inside, which is approximately 15% larger than that on the S9 Plus. And not only this, the Galaxy is also blitzed when it comes to charging speeds, because it only supports a 15-watt charger, but the new Huawei P20 Pro supports 22.5. You're not getting a bad deal on the Samsung when it comes to battery, but you're getting a very good one with the Huawei. Alright, so far this has been a very tough battle, with both phones trading blows. But what about the camera? The area in which both devices have tried to push the boat out to create something new and exciting. The headline feature with the P20 Pro is the triple camera setup, which I'm going to say is a much bigger move than dual aperture, which is what the S9 Plus brings to the table. What this triple camera enables is flexibility. The P20 offers a monochrome camera, and whilst both phones have telephoto lenses, the S9 Plus gives you 2 times lossless zoom, but the P20 gives 3 times. Now Samsung does have the advantage here of a wide-angle lens, which means that when you take one photo, it has the ability to capture 2 at the same time, one zoomed in and one zoomed out, getting more of the environment in, and that is a useful feature. Now, something you probably picked up almost instantly is just how processed the P20's images look, compared to the much more organic, natural-looking S9s. And it's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. I'd say artistic is probably the word to use for it, because the colours are very saturated, lines are very smoothed out, and it looks like a finished product, albeit not necessarily an accurate one. By default, the P20 captures in 10 megapixel resolution, and this is what enables it to get really fast shutter time and save the photos very quickly. Scaling it up to the full 40 megapixel resolution, the stabilization doesn't seem to be quite as good. The phone lags a little bit when you're taking them, and the processing time for the image is quite a lot longer. This compares to the S9, which has, again, a pretty fast shutter time, but is limited to 12 megapixels. So on balance, the P20 is still winning this battle because it just has the ability to capture so much higher resolution pictures than the S9. At least you have the option to scale it down if you want the extra speed. Perhaps even more interesting is low light photography, because these two phones are almost built around having this as a feature. And they're both great, but I would say the P20 actually takes this one. Detail is pretty similar, but the P20 does quite a bit of a better job at eliminating blur, due in part to its AI stabilization. And low light is where the dedicated color temperature sensor on the P20 Pro starts to come into play, because this is a very typical condition: nice, soft, warm light, and the S9 Plus will produce a very warm image as a result, but on the P20 it'll be corrected. For those of you who watched the P20 conference, you'll know the phone basically shattered records when it came to the DxOMark camera benchmark. It's therefore pretty surprising that the video it takes is only at 4K 30 frames per second. And furthermore, the video stabilization in the phone is actually disabled when you take 4K video, and it only works at 1080p. Don't get me wrong, the stabilization on the phone is fantastic, definitely better than what we've seen on the S9 Plus. But unfortunately, because the S9 Plus can stabilize well at 4K resolution, and this phone can't, the S9 is going to take this one. Both smartphones also have super slow motion video with exactly the same spec. I've also had a pretty decent play around with the front-facing camera on the P20, which, theoretically speaking, is far more detailed than the 8 megapixel camera on the S9 Plus. But unfortunately, it does a little bit too much face correction. Even when you turn the beauty mode down to 0, you still look like a doll. So with a 24 megapixel resolution, most of the image looks really crisp, really clear, and that's a level of clarity you don't normally see on a front-facing camera. But unfortunately, whatever you do, your face looks soft. So as a bit of a conclusive statement when it comes to these phones' cameras, I would say the Galaxy S9 Plus is a more reliable option. You know that it is going to be consistently high-performing in just about every scenario. The Huawei, on the other hand, has areas it excels in: the ability to take a 40 megapixel image, the ability to read text clearly even in very low lighting, but also areas it's just quite poor in for a flagship in 2018, like non-stabilized 4K video or 4K video at only 30 frames per second. To round things off, you might be thinking about speakers, in which both smartphones have a similar setup, using the earpiece as well as the speaker on the bottom to create a slightly more immersive effect. And out of the two, the Galaxy S9 Plus produces consistently louder and richer audio. Alright, but perhaps the most important factor in this entire head-to-head are the prices of the devices. As you might have guessed, the P20 Pro is the cheaper of the two, but not by as much as you might have expected. It costs over here in the UK $799, which is basically £800, compared to the Galaxy S9 Plus's $869. And when you factor in these prices, neither of these two phones completely win outright. In terms of display, raw power and speakers, the S9 Plus is the better option. But then design-wise and in terms of battery and camera detail, the P20 Pro is a huge success, and your end decision should really depend on which things you prioritize. Alright guys, if you did enjoy this video, go check out my unboxing of the P20 Pro, which we posted yesterday. And with that being said, my name is Aaron, this is Mr. Who's the Boss, and I'm signing out.